So today is, heaven knows what day it is, been a big week. Today is the 4th of October, and this is a teleconference, Pathwork teleconference on Pathwork Guide Lectures 2 and 3 and anything else we can throw in, on decisions and tests, and also choosing your destiny. So again, if you'd like to introduce yourself and let everybody know where you are in time and space anyway, even if the time is messed up. And if you have any questions, at any time you're welcome, and if you want to ask something now or mention something now, you're welcome to do that too. So this is Jad Rigsby. I'm in Austin.
Well, this is Lila in Denver, Colorado. This is Dory in Tampa, Florida, and I'm here all by myself. There are no other Pathwork people here in my area, so this is very welcoming to me, and I'm very pleased to be a part of this conference.
You're very welcome, Dory.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Gladys Kunimoto from California. And
welcome, Gladys.
Thank you. I'm also happy that you have this teleconference. And I want to tell you now that I won't be here the next time, on the 18th, I think.
Okay.
I'll be out of town.
All right, thank you.
This is Harry Davis in Texas. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Okay, Harry, it's Wendy in Forbes, Australia. Apparently it's 9 o'clock, but it feels like 8 o'clock. We've just done that daylight saving thing.
Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
This is Harry in Marshall, Texas.
Welcome, Harry.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the line? Okay, well, we'll go ahead. I'm going to read a quote from the lecture to get us started, but I'm going to give you an outline first. The lectures on decisions and tests and choosing your destiny can seem deceptively simple. And by that I mean that I don't feel that they're quite as convoluted and complex as some of the lectures on psychology, on wounding, on childhood traumas, and shame, and a lot of other things are. But I use the words deceptively simple because it's not easy to really get sometimes what the guide is talking about. So in the little place they give me to talk about the conference, I mentioned that the guide started off talking about, I want to call it a general spirituality. By that I mean he talked about what it was like to be in spirit, how we came, a much, much larger picture than only human situations. And then I find it somewhat humorous that about lecture 25 or so, he said, we need to talk about problems. We need to work with you on your issues. This isn't proceeding the way we think it should. And so the tone and tenor of the lectures changed from that point. And they mostly concerned a lot of the psychological, it's not psychology, but it can sound like it, issues that humans face. For the next almost 200 lectures. And then the last lectures turn back, and they talk about a much gentler, softer, more spiritual aspect of the same concepts. And part of that was because Ava had had a battle with cancer twice, and she finally succumbed to it in 1979. And it feels to me as if the last lectures were almost personal to her, supportive to her in terms of talking about spirit and acceptance and a larger picture. So there's a little bit of structure to the lectures. So this one was delivered in March of 1957, sorry. And so the quote I want to read is the beginning quote, and it says, most human beings, as a matter of fact, do not understand life on earth. They cannot comprehend its meaning and purpose because they can only see what they can behold with their physical eyes, and cannot yet bring their spiritual eye into focus. Therefore, everything seems meaningless. Their sorrows, their trials, their loneliness. But when you understand that this life is one of many learning periods, one link in a long chain, you will at first sense and later comprehend more fully the connections. And thus, you can bear the deprivations of this life. And thus you can pass the tests and fulfill the conditions necessary to enter a higher state of existence, a permanent happiness that cannot be taken away by any outside force. However, since your view behind the veil is limited, you cannot see that this rhythm is not at all broken, but continues in its own way, according to a system, if I may say so, which you cannot yet see in its totality. So, I know that you can all read the lectures, so I tend to go beyond the lectures and bring in other elements of literature and story and parable and situations to broaden an understanding of the lectures, rather than looking sentence by sentence, what does this mean? And what I believe a lot of people have a problem with when they are dealing sometimes with these lectures in particular is that without realizing it, they are living so strongly within the paradigm of being human. Best thing I can give you as an analogy is you're a goldfish swimming in water, and it's not easy to tell you what water is. So if we take you out of water, you get distressed, so we have to put you back in the water. It's not easy for a fish to comprehend the medium that is working within. And it is certainly not easy for a goldfish to see beyond the bowl. Now, I used to feel really sorry for goldfish. I'd never permit my children to have one, because I thought of this sentient being being trapped in a bowl their whole life. It was cruelty beyond all imagining. And I've picked up a fact in the last few months that goldfish have a 30-second memory. Now, maybe they used this in Finding Nemo. Maybe they invented it. I don't know. But I think I could tolerate having a goldfish if the truth is that after 2 cycles, they don't remember the first 2. And so the second circles around the bowl, the third and fourth circles around the bowl, are a novel experience, as are number 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. But I'm not a goldfish, so I was projecting onto this sentient being, I call it a sentient being, my desire for entertainment. So that's a downward example. Another downward example is thinking that dogs and cats anticipate the future. Now, they do to some limited extent, but they don't read the newspapers and they don't know how hard it's going to be to have money to go to the movies next week. So there's a limit to what an animal can comprehend and interpret and analyze and come up with an answer with. If we extend that past us as humans into spirit, to some extent it's like trying to teach a goldfish what the outside world is like when they've only got a 30-second memory in the first place, and you may not be able to finish the first sentence. And that paradigm is very hard for us to get out of because we're human. So I collect stories that help me explain this to people, what spirit might be like. And the one that seems most appropriate here comes from M. Scott Peck's book, In Heaven as on Earth. I don't necessarily agree with his philosophy all the way through, but this one portion that I'm going to describe to you is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So he describes that he died in the book, and he saw his body and he rose above it, and he did all the standard things that one expects to do when they die. And then he found himself alone in a green room. And I'm going to read this because I think he's a very good writer and you would appreciate his writing rather than my paraphrasing. I looked down and saw nothing except the wall. Now he'd reached up, supposedly, he'd reached up with his hand. And then he looked down and saw nothing except the wall. No hand, no shoulder. I glanced down at my feet. No feet either. And no legs, thighs, or torso. It dawned on me then that I had no body. Mentally, I kicked myself for being so slow for coming to the realization. What a metaphor. I wouldn't be kicking myself any longer, would I? I had no foot to kick myself with. How many of our mental metaphors presuppose the condition of having a body? Or proverbs. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, only now I didn't have a hand. All that glitters is not gold, but I no longer had eyes to see anything glitter. I looked around the room more closely, and all I observed was what wasn't there. There was no toilet, no bathroom. It brilliantly occurred to me that I might not need a toilet, since I wouldn't need to go to the bathroom if I had no body. What would life be like without having to go to the bathroom? Again, I laughed, but again it was hollow. I was beginning to panic. So again, that's from M. Scott Peck's In Heaven as on Earth. It's subtitled A Vision of the Afterlife. It's a lovely way of trying to describe that human beings may think so profoundly in terms of their body, in terms of their human activities, in terms of their human psychology, in terms of what's going to happen tomorrow and what do I need, that it is somewhat difficult to have a discussion about the spirit world. And it's somewhat difficult to have a discussion about the fact that human life is expendable in the sense that it may be one of many occurrences, that it is in fact a learning opportunity and not the be-all and end-all of our existence. Now, I'd mentioned this before in another teleconference. The catch here is that part of being human is being able to sense pain in having a system that is aroused by danger and floods us with adrenaline, so that it's very, very difficult for us to cognitively say, there's no tiger. Because we could be wrong, it could be a tiger, and we get eaten. And that's a shame, because it took a lot to get us here. And we're going to have to go through the whole reincarnation process again. And I can just hear the spirit world saying, next time you see a tiger, run. Got that? Okay. Now we're going to send you back. But watch out for the tigers, mate. And this is one of the reasons why we have a veil between us and our consciousness and the spirit world. Okay, so it's like if you had the manual and you knew everything, you'd simply say, I won't die until I'm ready, I have a spiritual task, I'm invulnerable as a soul, and therefore that's not the way this game is supposed to be played. What we're supposed to be doing here is feeling the mortality and allowing it to draw up from us our distortions. And by that I mean that we've come here to heal and transform some part of us that is not fully developed or which is in distortion. So if you have a part of your soul that's in distortion and it's around greed, then you come here on the earth and you learn that as long as you're here on earth, there is a finite amount of money. And what you may do as a human being is you may become very, very frightened that you won't get your share, which is kind of what greed's about. And so you may throw away your integrity, you may throw away things that you thought you valued because you are so afraid of being left behind, of being left bankrupt, that you don't realize how much you would give up for that. Now that life might go on for 50, 60 years, and you might amass a lot of things, and you might lose the love of your family, you might pass laws or build factories that were punitive to workers. You may create a lot of misery on earth amassing this fortune for yourself. And it may only be until after you pass on that you realize it's not worth it. That's what the human experience is meant to be. We're not supposed to win this game. We're not supposed to be perfect. We're not supposed to not have problems. So the guide, in its wonderful wisdom, starts off with lecture number 1, The Sea of Life, which is a beautiful lyrical lecture, and then goes on to Decisions and Tests, basically saying you can't stand still. That's not the point. You're not supposed to be right. There is no right. You need to be in movement, and in that movement you're going to find yourself coming up against tests. And that is not a mistake. You haven't done anything wrong. The tests were pre-planned. And here's where it gets a little bizarre. The way I see it is a lot of the clients that I work with, and this is my fantasy, simply enjoy my fantasy. A lot of the clients that I work with, I feel had some part in their incarnatory process. And I say that because they have a lot of awareness about it. I think people that come to significant spiritual practices, including but not solely Pathwork, are becoming aware of a larger reality. They're really coming outside their selfish, single, humanistic point of view. And they're trying to understand and see and work with the whole of humanity as brothers and sisters. To do that means that you're a fairly developed spirit. And in other lectures, the guide says that fairly developed spirits are allowed to participate in the incarnatory process. I recommend that you read lecture 34. I love lecture 34, where they talk about the exchanging juice. It sounds like science fiction. They talk about exchanging juices and going from hall to hall and getting permission slips, and it's an interesting lecture. But my point is that if you participate in the incarnatory process, then you have more ability to accelerate your own task. So that the Pathwork lecturers are talking to people who may have a thinner veil between them as humans and the spirit world. And they may be beginning to be able to sense a certain amount about the spirit world. I hope this is making sense. So I love the word veil. I did a little theater work when I was a kid, and there's a thing called a scrim, and if you've ever seen a live theater production, a scrim is a gauze curtain, and when the gauze curtain is lowered and there is no light behind it, it looks solid. But when there is a light behind it, you see a ghostly image, and they use it in the theater to do flashbacks.
Also a fabric that's used in shades and draperies and curtains and window treatments for support. Yeah.
And so it does the same thing sometimes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you have a scrim-like material in your window, sometimes it gives you a semblance of privacy, but at night when you turn on your lights, it doesn't give you any privacy at all.
Yeah, you can see right through it.
Yeah.
So the way I think of the spirit world is that there is a veil or a scrim between us and the spirit world. And depending on the level of development that you have, you can work, you can earn, you can strive to comprehend and learn to listen carefully to the feedback loop, to the cause and effect loop, and become more and more aware of activities in the spirit world to the degree that you're supposed to. The guide says very often that if you're not supposed to know something, you won't. They'll take care of that. So it's not because you're greedy or eager or ambitious that you get this privilege. This privilege comes from earning it. So that's actually in the lecture on decisions and tests, and that's what I meant by the lecture is, I'm losing my words. Superficial, that doesn't work. I may have to give up on this. The lecture can seem easy, and then if you look at it bit by bit, you may be able to see that the guide is describing to humans what the truth might be in their existence that they may not be fully aware of. That's huge. So that's why I like analogies such as science fiction. I'm a very big science fiction fan. And I liked this piece by M. Scott Peck because what he describes is, as I read at the end of it, the fact that he has a real hard time simply being a ball of light. He has a very hard time saying, oh, I wish I could see someone, and that person appears in front of them. That going into the spirit world is a dimensional shift, and the same rules don't work. So when you are working with spiritual tasks, they don't have to meet the same standards that earthly tasks need to meet. They work by different rules.
And who defines those rules?
The first primary source of rules are the spiritual laws. I do various conferences on them. They're on my website.
Okay.
It's not a codified thing. This is not a catechism from Pathwork, but some people got together and they made up a very brief one-page list that covers a lot of ground of principles that the spirit world operates by and that human life operates by, even if we don't see it. So the answer to your question would be God. God came up with the plan. That I don't mean to be simple, but that's ultimately God's plan. What the guide, who sometimes talks about his job giving these lectures, what the guide indicates to us is that there's a very busy afterlife. And for a lot of spirits, they've never been to Earth, so the term afterlife itself can be deceptive. It's not after, it's just their life. That there are a lot of spirits who work on their spirituality without coming to specifically the planet Earth to work on it. And in another place in the lectures, and there's so many references, I just can't keep track of this stuff. It's really hard. You just read the lecture and go, wow, and hopefully make some notes. But there is one lecture where he talks about how there are many, many other worlds where these kinds of spiritual tasks can be manifested and worked on other than Earth. We're just not the only place. So in terms of rules, what we're talking about, and this is a really good place to start going a bit deeper. For human beings, rules are different than what the guide presents as spiritual law. So a rule basically says, don't do that or. What spiritual law says is that every cause creates an effect. And he doesn't use the word karma very often, but it sounds very similar to how we understand karma, that if you create negativity, it will come back at you. It's an immutable law. You put negativity out in the world, and it's simply a matter of time before you experience what you've put out. Now, the tricky part is that amount of time could involve 3 lifetimes.
Or 3 minutes.
Or 3 minutes. Now, people can understand the 3-minute part. We got that. Okay? So I yell at somebody, and my foot guns the accelerator, and I get a ticket. We got that. Okay? What is the message? Don't get angry while you're driving in the car. Okay? But it is very difficult for human beings, for instance, to see someone getting away with something their entire life and not seeing any retribution, not seeing cause and effect come into that person's consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? We have a hard time with that. We want cause and effect to link up and complete the cycle in a single lifetime.
Jan?
Yes.
I think this is applicable, but I was talking to somebody lately, and I just began to realize that how important it is for a lot of people, the concept of prophecy, biblical prophecy or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you see that a lot in fundamentalism, but I didn't realize until lately that there's a lot of emphasis put on that. And I wonder, could you address that in the light of what you're talking about now, or does that apply?
No, it applies. I'd be happy to. What the guide is saying, and I'm not picking out specific quotes because I would have my nose in the lecture and my brain wouldn't operate for this teleconference. What the guide is saying is that some people do get a clue about what's going on. There are mediums. There are people with psychic ability. There are people who can sense into a larger cause and effect that the rest of us can't see. And to one extent or another, they can become seers, S-E-E-R.
Mm-hmm.
They can become prophets. Because all a prophet is doing is telling you what's going to happen. I went into detail last time about some scientific facts, and I'm very wary of doing that too many times. But, for instance, anyone who could look into their crystal ball and tell us where the world is going economically right now, if we thought they would write, that would be like a biblical prophet to us right now. People would flock to that person. They would be grateful. That person could make them feel unafraid of what's to come because he might be able to outline it a bit. And so instead of going into the darkness, into going into the unknown, we'd simply say, okay, it's going to be bad for 9 and 8. Remember the prophecy about 7 years of famine? 7 years of fat, 7 years of famine from Joseph?
Right.
Okay. If you didn't know what was going to happen, then you might foolishly just be extravagant with your 7 years of fat. And then when the famine came along, you might feel like it was terrible. But if you knew the entire 14-year plan, you could get through it. And that's what they did. And that's what prophets can do for us. Now, sometimes they look miraculous because they're predicting the weather. But other prophets are really talking about spiritual cause and effect. They're telling us that if we don't hold our families with love, if we don't hold our communities with integrity, that we will have a disintegration of our societies. That is to a certain degree a kind of prophecy.
It would seem like it would be difficult, it'd be an opportunity to make mistakes about that if you started speculating about what a prophecy is supposed to be and then interjected into present time there, you might not be right.
Yes, so I'm going to use the word medium because I think that the prophets were mediums, that they were sensing into the spirit world. Yes, the clarity, the purity of the medium is definitely going to affect the message.
Mm-hmm.
So
what about the layperson, though, that reads stuff and then they try to interpret it?
Well, to some extent, we all have to take responsibility for who we believe. So this is where religion went when we stopped being in the medieval ages and we came into the place where people could make their own decisions. There's a value in that, but there will be a period of time where we don't know enough and we'll make ignorant interpretations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as humanity moves forward, lurches forward, age after age after age, we go through a period of childhood and adolescence in handling more and more self-responsibility. So you could analyze this in terms of religion, where religion simply used to be given to you on a spoon, where you didn't even understand the language that was being spoken. And then you got to the point where lay people could go to college and not become priests or rabbis, simply to learn and to become more educated. And where you have discussion groups nowadays in communities where you study the Bible, and some of those study groups are fabulous. Those guys are scholars. But a prophet is someone that it's kind of like everybody votes for who's the prophet. And then you have people who say that's a false prophet. It's almost like a spiritual election. Okay? So, Harry, you probably would be very interested in, there are several lectures on the Bible. If you can't find them, I'll give you the numbers to look at, or I'll email them to you.
Okay.
I love the way the guide talks about the Bible, because he says, yes, there's a lot of truth there, and there is distortion. So the guide simply recognizes that there were politics, and there were a lot of other things going on. It would be lovely if we had a pure spiritual work Bible. If we had a perfect Bible to work from. But even the Bible itself has gone through many, many iterations and editing processes and changes. And ultimately, what this work is about, which is also described in Decisions and Tests, this work is about finding the place in you that feels what is right and going ahead with that. That, yes, children get told what to do, and they don't have to take so much responsibility. But if you are a being who is looking to accelerate your process and take more responsibility for your task. Now, if you don't want to do that, don't. You'll still do spiritual work. Okay, you don't get out of it just because you turn away and turn around and go someplace else. But it will be different. But if you say, I want to know, and I'm going to follow my heart, and I'm going to explore, and I'm going to do what I think is right, at that point, you may be tested, which is the other half of the lecture. But check back. Did I answer your question, Harry?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So what you said was how important is biblical prophecy. I think that's up to every individual. Let me give you a couple scenarios. Someone who is a fundamentalist, strict constructionist, conservative, pick what arena you want to talk in. If they feel that they have found the truth, and they are going to hold on to that truth no matter what, then they are in integrity. But if they are holding on out of fear, they are not in integrity. Holding on out of fear means that you're afraid to look around. So the same action can be taken with completely different intention. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So the Bible is a tool. That's all it is. The Bible, politics, economics, manufacturing companies, these are tools for spiritual development. And it's simply a matter of what you're involved with. So if you find yourself involved with religious groups, that may be in truth. Your spiritual task may flower there. Or easily, you may grow more, you may see more in that kind of community than you would if you were a research assistant, if that's where your passion was. But if someone is a research assistant, that may be their passion. And their spiritual task may be to go into the intricacies of science and find a truth that really matters to them. There's no right way to do this. And I think I'm addressing also the question about rules. That's why there aren't any. There is nothing you can do that is wrong, inherently wrong. There is no situation that is inherently bad, and there's no situation that is inherently good. And by that I mean that any situation can be made to be used for bad purposes, and any situation can be made to use for good purposes. It's a matter of what you do with it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you find yourself having made a decision, which you went into thinking that it was the right decision, and it ends up, using the terminology right and wrong, and it ends up that it's obviously was the wrong decision. Okay, so then that decision itself was not right or wrong. That was just what you needed to do.
So let me give you some analogies to this. Okay? If you take the wrong turn, but you come across a meadow that makes your heart sing before you find your way back to the main road, was that a wrong turn?
Okay, I got that one. What happens if you make the wrong turn and you pass a trash dump? Was it the wrong turn?
Not necessarily. Okay? What if you needed, and I'm going to be literal here, and this is very difficult, okay, because I'm better with actual realities, but I'm going to just, it's a very common experience, so I'm going to take the generality. We need to look at what you're actually describing. You take a wrong turn and you basically go by a landfill where the smell goes on for a period of time, not just one little thing that you pass by at 30 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Okay? When you pass by that landfill, imagine for a moment what might go through your mind. Now, you see, here's where it gets completely tricky. What goes through your mind, what goes through my mind, what goes through, it could be completely different for all of us, same situation.
Correct.
Okay? But I'm going to spin you two scenarios. One is that you look at the landfill and you just get sick, absolutely sick. And at that moment in time, you click into, I am going to do something about this. I am going to change what's happening here. This can't go on.
Okay? That would be a positive experience was unpleasant. If you wound up in a landfill situation and you were revolted and you went home and became compulsive, obsessive about smells, that might lead you into a tight spiral that would eventually fall apart, right? You can't get rid of smells. So it would be a longer arc, but there could still be a very positive result. But that obsessive-compulsive thing, that psychological thing that happened to you, that triggered you, could go on for 30, 40 years. You could be a nutcase for 30, 40 years. But from a spiritual perspective, we don't know the end of that story. We don't know what that person needed. That person may have needed a focus on their life. Otherwise, they would have been scattered and just wandered around on the earth and not getting anything done. But by staying at home and scrubbing everything in sight 15 times a day, something else is possible. Can you see where I have a hard time saying what's wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but it is a good philosophy to look at life from that angle, for every experience. Then, for every experience, whether you see it negative or positive, to look at it in the light in which you just defined, that comes from a higher self, that comes from a higher consciousness, that comes from a place of awareness. So
right. You've already done it. You've already circled back here.
Yeah.
If you work from a place of spirituality,
yeah,
where we're all going to go home, and we're all perfect, and we're all just here to do a task, where does wrong fit into that?
Yeah, it doesn't.
So as part of a spiritual discipline, and I like the joke version of this, it's a discipline because you got to practice. Okay? Because people are going to convince you what's right and what's wrong, and it's real easy to take that cliche.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really easy to absorb judgments because they're efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Mud is bad, soap is good. It keeps you alive when there's germs in the mud.
Yeah.
So for centuries and millennia of human experience, we have gathered up a ton of cliches. What if one day we are invited to let them go like Mr. Peck did when he imagined being dead and found that his verbal communication skills sounded ludicrous because he never realized how often he was referring to his body, and now he doesn't have one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's exactly what I was trying to build here, a sense that we really need to be soft and generous and open when we go into spiritual work because the basic factors are different. The time span is much longer, and the breadth is much greater than the right, wrong, good, bad, I win, you lose world that we actually live in. In the world we live in, you do need to compete to some degree. You do need to hold a job. You do need to gather certain amounts of material to you. Depending on your personal values and your culture, you need X number of clothes. I keep seeing movies and films where people are taking off and they've got one suitcase. And I don't know how I could do that. I'm just not a one-suitcase girl. I don't get it. And back in the 40s, when you look at an old 40s film noir, people are traveling the country with one suitcase. It seems common. Beyond my comprehension. I can't do that. Okay? But that's just me. I kind of envy that life to some degree. I wonder what they have that I don't when they are free enough to pack one suitcase and hit the road. So without judging myself, this is my personal point of view, I try to see the possibility in what someone else is doing, and that does not mean that I do it. But what it does for me is it enlarges my understanding of the possibilities of the spectrum of spirituality.
Well, that's great. That was great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me segue with this a little bit. What I normally do is quit at the hour mark, and I have to turn off the recording and create a gap so I can find this. So I like to just go after the lectures for the first hour and then hopefully do a bit more discussion in the second. The notes that I'm using, including the quotes from the Peck book and some other things, I'll email after the session. But I don't develop them until a couple hours before, so I can't send them off ahead of time. I found an interesting brochure put out by the Fetzer organization. I have no idea who these people are. And they could be rabid something or others, and I don't care. This brochure is still good. So whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, this brochure really impressed me. And it was about the American dream. Now, I find it unfortunate when I'm teaching spirituality, the first thing I want to do is cut and paste out anything that has to do with a particular nation. But if it's source material, I really can't do that. So what this brochure was called, it was by Betty Sue Flowers, it was called The American Dream and the Economic Myth. Now, I think you can discard the American dream from this. I think this is universal, which is why it impressed me. And what she talks about is myths. And this is discussed in the lecture. The lecture discusses our stories. Do you remember that part? I hope people remember that part. What the quote from the lecture is, that was a quote from the American Dream. Quote from the lecture is, thus, my dear ones, it is important for you to recognize that much of your repetitious events in life have been chosen and fixated by your spirit before incarnation, when you still had the foresight, before matter encompassed the spirit. It will be a help for you to know this. These quotes are from Choosing Your Destiny, Lecture 3. And you will also recognize that the fated events in your life are already spirit forms which manifest then in a concrete way. I know the lectures are hard reading. They're really, really hard. Sometimes you pull a quote out, and I understand it because I spent 3 hours with it, but I read it and I wonder if it makes any sense to anybody. Basically, what they're talking about is that the stories that we undergo in our lives were given to us. They were designed for us. They were planned for us. It is not an accident that you are born with a specific gender, with a specific nationality. It is not an accident who your parents are. It is not an accident what community you grow up in. Even if you immediately move, it's as if your spirit knew that your parents had wanderlust and would shift almost immediately after birth. So all the things that seem solid in your life, most of them were seen as probable beforehand, given the right cast of characters. Okay? So that also applies to the culture that you find yourself in. And by culture, I'm going to put a time element on that, besides the fact that it's Asian or Australian or American or Canadian or French. Okay? You've also got what millennium of French, what time period of Asian. Okay? And humans have gone through various stages of development. And when you get born into a certain age, you're pretty much trapped to some degree by your age. I remember reading a little story that I use sometimes, and I had to decide that it was too complicated for this teleconference. But it's a lovely essay called Flatland, which I love dearly. But it's also very complicated. I keep forgetting how complicated it is. And in the preface to the lecture, Isaac Asimov does the preface. And he says it's interesting that Mr. Abbott, William Abbott was the author, was so able in 1882 to imagine and describe multi-dimensional concepts outside his own reality, that he could even write a story to explain it to other people in a simple fable version. And yet, even in this fable, his attitudes towards women suck. He had a Victorian mindset about what women should do and what their place in society was. It's really awful. I read through that and said, ooh, I'm not even sure I want to advise this book anymore. You have to give somebody a great big Post-it note on the front saying, don't get upset. Because he uses women in the story like you'd use a pawn. So what I'm bringing forward here is, notice the discrepancy. In 1882, this man was able to explain to people what the fifth or sixth dimension might look like by going backwards and forwards. And yet he was still trapped by his own culture's attitude. And he didn't even know it. So when you're born into a culture and a time period, you're going to be accepting, I'm going to use the word stories. And the stories we tell create a spiritual vortex. And that takes me back to the phrase, stories reflect cultural attitudes. And if they're repeated often enough and you don't challenge them, you'll wind up having absorbed that cultural attitude. From a spiritual standpoint, that is not an accident. That's part of your portfolio. So this brochure about the American dream and the economic myth talks about how we used to work with, there are 4 levels of myth that she references. That the first was a religious myth. And she describes it as when we accept no compromise in relation to something good. When they refuse to compromise on the purity of their purpose, but instead see issues in terms of black and white and right and wrong. So in the religious myth, there is black, white, and right, wrong. Then she describes a phase of going through the hero myth. And she's speaking from an American point of view, but again, just make it bigger for yourself. Our culture has often had a double standard for the hero myth. The winners played the hero game, while women, minorities, and inferiors were expected to organize their lives around the myth of religion and to behave for the good of society. So she's describing in a 200-year history a period of time where religion ruled things, and then a shift where heroes ruled things. And then she speaks of the democratic myth and says, in the democratic myth, truth is a function of experimentation and reason, not a dictum handed down from the top of a religious hierarchy. And then the point of the brochure is she goes on to say the economic myth. And she says one of the reasons for the economic myth is potentially the first truly global myth, is that it is not bounded by the traditional fences of language. The economic myth honors quantity over quality. Power lies in the numbers. And what she is putting forward is that we may be in a time now where our actual culture, not just our finances, but our actual culture is governed by economic as being the ultimate arbitrator. Now there's a folksy little story that goes with this, I'm not sure who said it, about you can tell what a culture cares about. Oh, it was Joseph Campbell, sorry. You can tell what a culture cares about by noticing what their tallest buildings represent. So at some point, our cathedrals were the tallest buildings in our towns. Then the palaces of our kings were the tallest buildings. Tallest or grandest. Then there was our government for a period of time. We went through the whole world went through a period of nationhood. And now the tallest buildings are insurance companies and banks worldwide. What I'm trying to do in presenting this is to prompt you to consider that your spiritual task was meant to happen during this time period. It's not an accident that you were born and that you're an adult to be an adult during this time period. You planned this. If you didn't plan it, if you weren't primary in the planning, you were involved in the planning. That this particular time period, this crunch, where values are torn apart, where we are asking serious questions about who we are and what we value, you thought this was the greatest place in the world to do what you need to do. So to me, we're embarking on a spiritual journey, and I really don't care what spiritual journey people take. I teach this one, but anything will work. That part of what a spiritual journey is about is raising consciousness. Mm-hmm. So the lecture on decisions and tests and choosing your destiny are meant to, it's like fluffing up a feather mattress, meant to encourage you to consider a larger perspective, to take a look at things from places beyond the human experience. Because if you're working on spirituality, you're working beyond humanity. So making any decision will teach you something. You can't stand still. Guide says that standing still is a decision. That you're not supposed to not have tests. I do try to take a positive attitude about this. I call very, very difficult, painful, sudden situations pop quizzes. okay, girl, how are you going to handle this? How much of a pathwork helper are you? How much charity and love can you hold in this? Ooh, she did that. Okay, that's good. She passed. And if I don't pass, I simply get more experience, I get more opportunity, and they'll keep throwing pop quizzes at me. So this is what I believe these first few lectures are meant to do. The guide is basically introducing himself, and he's introducing a different point of view than we may have considered. And even though these are the first ones, and back in 56, I really believe that in Pathwork, we don't always pick up this message. We focus sometimes too much on the psychological or the how does my relationship work, all this, and we forget to paint that bigger picture as a background to work against. So this is where I specialize in my teaching, is working the full backdrop sketched in, knowing that there's no way that I can sketch it in, knowing that I can't know, but I can get a feeling that it's at least bigger, and I can raise my head and look around and listen very carefully and wonder what's really going on. I wonder what this situation is actually about. If God's whole purpose in life, pardon my pun, but that's how I think because I'm human, if God's whole purpose in his lifetime is not to punish me, why do I have to do all this stuff? If you take punishment out of the equation, you're in spiritual territory because humans punish. It's what we do. I'm hoping that made some sense. What I'd like to do is this. I want to be silent for about 30 seconds because otherwise my inexpensive program can't find the gap in the tape. I can't split it in half, and then I've got this massive 40 meg file people are trying to download. So I'm going to mute my phone for about 30 seconds.
But okay, so along this whole lines of, why we're here and all of this, and, knowing that the pathwork is about, finding the parts of the soul that need to be, if you want to say, purified or, worked through. But where did that come from in the first place? How did our souls get to this point that they need this work? So like I said, if that's too much for this conference call, that's cool. But that was just on my mind.
That's okay. Please understand that it's a massive question. It's a great question. So that's okay. But I have a cheap answer. Okay? I got these Pathwork lectures. And all you got to do is read 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and you'll get your answer.
Okay.
So that's the facetious answer, and I say that because it's almost fun, but I can tell you what numbers to look up. But the serious answer to your question is this. Again, I find it fascinating that the guide started off with a more mystical, spiritual approach. And then in my vernacular, got down to brass tacks. Okay? And he got down to that after he, and I can't know, there's no way for me to know, and I like to joke about it. So here's Jan's joke. The guide comes down, he lays out in 25 lectures the entire blueprint, and looks around and goes, you got it, right? And realizes they don't. And goes back to his team and says, whoops, we missed something.
Those first 25 lectures, you think that was supposed to be like if we were at some more enlightened level, when, oh, okay, got it now, thanks.
Yes, I do.
Wow, okay.
I do. Now, I don't think that the guide's dumb enough to have said whoops after 25 lectures, so that's why it's a joke story, okay? But what actually happened on a practical community level was the first people who started gathering around Ava tended to be, and I heard this from somebody in their language, and I don't want to change too many words, The story I was told was that she collected a group of mystics. And then when the guide decided to go after personality issues, the mystics went away.
Yeah.
And were replaced by therapists and psychologists who were fascinated to find a spiritual component to their life's work. Now, I trust me, that's an exaggeration. But there was a changing of the guard in the community at that point. Okay? And this happened after the guide had put it all out. I find in those lectures the answers to what you are asking. And I don't mind giving you a simplistic version in answer to your question. Please understand, everybody understands that I'm trimming a lot here.
Mm-hmm.
That basically what happened was that in the creation there was distortion. Now, let's go back. If the guide must have known who we were, God must have known what he created. This is the Adam and Eve story. Why would God have created distortion? Well, what else are you going to do for the next 5 billion years? Why not allow a creation and see how it goes? And in the lecture on the fall, the guide describes that the spirits began to separate. They began to find their individualism. Once again, I'm going to analogize this to Adam and Eve. That the story of Adam and Eve and the story that the Pathwork guide tells can be seen as identical if you release the demand that there be an apple. Okay? But if you need the apple, the guide does not talk about an apple. Okay? But if you can read these with that same sense that God created perfection and then allowed free will, and that blew it up. Okay? And we've been trying to find our way back ever since. Now, one of those lectures that I spoke to you about is free will. I believe it's number 18. It's a fascinating consideration that the whole purpose of our being here is so that we will make mistakes and learn what mistakes are, that we will discover cause and effect, that we will see the consequences of our actions. Let me put it this way. You can hold a specific belief about how something should be done, right? Let's say you think that a certain law would be an excellent law. And another person argues with you, says, no, you don't understand. There's going to be ramifications and there's going to be problems, and you don't get it. And you say, I'm really not interested in discussing it with you because I really believe that you could simply write this law and get rid of the problem. What the guide is saying is that we, like story characters in our literature, in our mythology, in our history, in our movies, we become a player in a drama where that law is enacted perhaps upon us. And we get to experience, not only in excruciating detail, but with the illusion that there's no way out, the effects of that law. Now imagine after a lifetime of that, you die, you go back to heaven, and they all crowd around and say, hi, what'd you learn? Still want to lobby for that law? And you go, no, I don't think so, thank you. I believe I actually get why that's a problem. That's what we came here to do. We came here to feel the pain of our own distortion. We came here to make a mess and then live in it. Until we say no more. If not living in this way means I have to obey spiritual law or become disciplined, so be it. I am now ready. Let's do it. Let's go there. I understand what my limited thinking can create. And I'm willing to let go of my position. I'm willing to let go of my beliefs. For the sake of me, but also for the sake of you. If I wouldn't do it to me, I never wanted to harm you. I thought it was the right thing to do. I thought it was for the good of all. And now I see that it's not. So I've wandered away a bit, but that's, once the Garden of Eden started breaking up and we all went on our separate ways, the goal is for us to come back. But to come back in integrity. To come back because we're genuinely done. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's, what do I want to say? It's one of those that you can chew on it for quite some time, I think.
Yeah. They're fascinating lectures. They're really fascinating. And I know that for a lot of people, they will read about the fall and get depressed because they're taking a Catholic part. I don't mean to disparage Catholics, but they're taking an original sin attitude. There's something wrong with me. That's why I fell. No, you just existed. And because you existed, you have some things that need to be worked on. That's all. No more so than you would call a child inferior, simply because he's not yet developed. So what we're doing down here is developing. That's what we're here for. And somewhere in 2 and 3, the guide talks for a paragraph or two about, it's hard. Got that. Very hard. And that's why the guide keeps saying that you were part of the plan. You knew how hard this would be. You may also have known that this was the only way you would release your distortion. That there wasn't an easy road for you. So from a higher self place, from a loving place, from a place where you care so much that you'll do whatever it takes, you may have designed a very, very challenging life.
That doesn't seem to be my attitude now, because I always seem to want to take the easy way out.
Well, so let's play with that for a second. That's what you want to do. Does it work?
Well, no, I'm still plugging away.
Okay. So at the end of plugging away, trying to take the easy way, what you may find out is the hard way was actually shorter.
Yeah, I'm trying to believe that. I'm trying to trust that.
Mm-hmm. And what the guide is saying was that however long you need, you can have. In this lifetime or any other.
We've got about 45 minutes tonight.
There's a phrase, there are many, many phrases that the guide repeats a lot, and one is that you cannot judge someone else, okay? You don't know what their story is. You don't know where they are in the spectrum. You don't know what they were trying to do. You don't know what they're trying to adjust in this particular lifetime. That does not mean you have to tolerate it. That doesn't mean you don't have to lock them up. Some people do need to be locked up. What it means is you can't truly know their spiritual story.
Can you ever come to know someone else's spiritual story?
Okay. What the guide proposes and what the 200 lectures in the middle of these two bookends are about is learning to know yours.
Yes, I understand.
And once you have a glimmer about yours, yes, I do believe that you can start to see the larger picture.
Yeah.
But to see yours can be a lifetime's experience. To some degree, some people say that you should never use other people as examples. I disagree violently. I think that we are all one, and cultural experience, movies, plays, music, other people, other situations, politics, kings, this is all there to exemplify spirituality. The guide actually says the title of Peck's book was As in Heaven as on Earth. Mm-hmm. The guide says that our life here is a manifestation of spirit. Mm-hmm. So, yes, learning to understand another person is one way to understand you, and that is the spiritual meaning of relationship, which is Lecture 180. That the idea is that you go into relationship because it is in the intimate details of another and your interaction with that person that a deeper truth can be found. Mm-hmm. But if we take the focus off us, we're missing the point. Ultimately, your job is to become the best you can be. Because when you do that, you help me. You help everyone on this phone call. You help everyone on the planet. The guide repeats over and over again that you have no idea how powerful a good deed is. If you could see it like the spirit world sees it, you would understand that a good deed, a pure intention,
creates a much larger wave and manifestation of spiritual energy than pettiness or selfishness or even cruelty. But you see, if we saw that, it would be easy. We're supposed to do it because it's right, not because we can win with it. Does that make sense?
Make sense? Yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay. Yeah, because it's right from a spiritual perspective, mm-hmm. from a heart perspective. You know, I've just started to work with the Pathwork lectures. You know that I haven't gone through very many mm-hmm. of the lectures, and I've studied Buddhism for a long time, and I find in the few lectures that I've started with a lot of similarities to Buddhism mm-hmm. in that what you just said, you know, about kindness and where it stems from its true intention mm-hmm. is interesting for me.
I hold that any philosophy that has integrity and holds truth as valuable is telling the same story. But it may address different parts of being a human being. So, whereas there's a place where people come into Pathwork and they start holding up the flag and saying, this is it. This is the best thing since sliced bread. There's nothing better than this. And we all stand back going, oh, let them calm down. Please let them calm down. Because, you know, it's right for you. You like it. But we don't want to go around telling other people how they should do their spiritual work. And the truth is that spiritual work can happen mopping a floor, or walking the dog, or in an argument with your superior over a lack of integrity in your company. This is all spiritual work. But for some people, they may need some isolation for a while. They may need a lot of meditative technique. They may need isolation. They may need to be removed from the hurly-burly qualities of life. And that kind of person will find a spiritual discipline that suits them. Pathwork is very much about this world. What is happening today? What is true for you now? I want to be someplace else. Well, but you're not. I would rather have a different partner than get one. Okay? But we're looking at the harsh reality that you're with somebody you don't admire. We need to know why. If you learn why and you really get how you reached out to someone that you don't really admire, and decided to share your personal life with them, and you heal that part of you that, you know, and the story at this point can go into 1,000,000 versions, that you sell yourself out, that you don't, you know, I can't even begin to list for you the number of reasons why somebody would choose a partner that would betray their integrity. But we do. And there's something to be learned from that. But just like the self-help books, they say don't go from pillar to post. Don't do serial monogamy without figuring out what this is all about. That's all Pathwork's saying. Stop and pause when you start to see a pattern and see if you can find out what that pattern's about. And find your part in it. So this is a really good segue to one other piece that I wanted to bring in. One of the things about telling stories, and I believe this is in Pathwork Guide, Pathwork Lecture 3, is that if you tell yourself a victim story, okay, you will be a victim. If you tell yourself a hero story, you will be a hero. And by that I mean, the victim says, oh, woe is me, it's not my fault, I can't do anything anyway, and so no effort is made. The hero story says, there's a challenge. Something is wrong, and I have power. I may not know how to use it. I may need some extra help. I may need a magic turtle, or you know, I may need to search around a little bit to get the support I need. But when I do, I'm going to do something about it. And if I die in the attempt, so be it. It's the right thing for me to do, and I'm going to go ahead. Can you see the difference in those two stories? And the guide's version of that is you create your own reality. You tell yourself a victim story, you become a victim. If you talk all day about criticizing other people, you make yourself small and petty, because that's not the truth. That's just one layer of truth. If you tell yourself every single day, I'm going to find something positive in my life, you have the chance to become a positive, empowered person who sees things from a different perspective. So I did this riff, I did this worksheet that I decided to call Secret Holidays. And what I did was I downloaded something off the internet that I thought would be helpful, and it was so negative. I just cringed. My stomach tightened up. Because the way I read it, he was telling you what not to do. Well, geez, join the crowd, people. Everybody's telling me what not to do. Okay, how about if somebody told me what to do that was positive? So I rewrote the whole thing and went on.
Not until after the 4th of November.
So I called it Secret Holidays.
But you know what? You
how
can
to have a day off.
You can do this for 24 hours.
Oh, you can?
Okay.
You can give yourself a break for 24
number
hours.
one is
Harry, the world will
media
not fall
news
apart. It's
input
already on its
holiday.
way.
That's
It's not going to slow down
because
you're not
recently
watching
I've
the
been
news.
overwhelmed with news.
If
Take a break from global gossip. Now, I got that, but you know what? You can actually, hang on, you can do this for 24 hours. You can give yourself a break for 24 hours. Trust me, Harry, the world will not fall apart. It's already on its way. It's not going to slow down because you're not watching the news. If we're going to hell in a handbasket, taking a 24-hour refresher break for yourself is not going to change global financial meltdown.
And if it goes to hell in a handbasket, we'll still be included anyway, right?
Yeah, right. You don't get to opt out by taking a 24-hour break. So that's something you can do anytime you want to give yourself a break. We don't think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Number 2, television and computer holiday. I'm afraid I'm addicted. This would be really hard for me, but I know it is possible in theory to turn off the television and turn off the computer for 24 hours. You may go through withdrawal, but it can be done. Number 3, again, I find this interesting because it doesn't make any sense by itself, partly because I was walking away from what I thought was a negative philosophy. Number 3 is celebrate amnesty. Forgive someone wholeheartedly, yourself included, who has offended you or what you love. Forgiveness is about absolution, to no longer blame, especially if they're guilty. Forgiving somebody who's innocent is not forgiving. Release your inner tyranny against imperfection and your disappointment in the human condition. What if you woke up in the morning and said, I'm going to find ways to forgive? And what I'm talking about here is you can make some life-changing attitude shifts by pulling the plug one day at a time. The 4th was donate compliments. Offer as many heartfelt compliments as possible. Disperse them like bouquets of roses. Refrain from criticism of any kind, of any person, object, or activity. For one day.
Yeah, well, we saw how hard it is. Why is it so hard sometimes to compliment somebody or?
Well, the point of the exercise was not to do anything specific, but to notice how hard it is to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? To notice how we fall back into a rut that we didn't even know we were in. So what I'm playing with here is, if the question is, where do I start? It's so simple where you start. You just find an attitude and you see if you can change it. And once you have learned to change 4 or 5 attitudes, you're on your way. But if you cannot change an attitude, then the rest of the work is going to be hard. So again, spiritual discipline requires practice. Now, the guy that invented this, he wanted to do it for 10 days, and he wanted to eat vegetarian. Man, the list was just, I read it and my hackles rose. Mm. Okay, because I'm so tired of being told how to live by other people. And then I realized that's his issue. You know, let him have his issues. If I write a worksheet, I'm not going to tell you what fruits to eat and not eat for your spiritual development. But that's me. And the idea of doing this for 9 days seemed to me to be ludicrous. That's like telling somebody that they should be running marathons, so you should go out tomorrow and run 17 miles. You'll kill yourself. You're not used to this. You need to ramp up on this slowly. Like I say, it'll be included with the email that I sent out so you can get a copy of it. Kitchen and shopping holiday. Have only one major meal.
That's number 5?
No, that's actually 7. I skipped. Let me go back to 5. Activity. Live a conscious day. Notice life rather than just living it. Now, the Australians will love this one. When I went over to Australia, they drive on the other side of the road. And I'm not afraid. I bought a car and started driving. In fact, I rented a car the first day I was there and started driving. It's not as easy as you'd think. I got in a lot of trouble. But I learned. And part of the reason I was able to do it is I understood that I would have to drive consciously for between 3 and 6 months.
What side is the steering wheel on?
The other side. Whatever yours is on, I don't even think about which side because I go back and forth so often I don't even have words for it. Wherever yours is, theirs is on the other side.
Okay. So that makes sense.
Okay. So what I'm expressing here is that you can do this, but because driving habits are so automatic, they become automatic, that to drive on the other side of the road requires conscious driving. It will wear you out. It is exhausting. And if you blink or get casual about it, the next thing you know, you're on the wrong side of the road. So it was an experience for me to see how ingrained my habits were and to do something consciously that I would normally be able to relax about and let go. And that went on for 6 solid months. And to this day, I can't tell you which side. I look for the signals. I'm trained now after 7 years. I will drive however I'm supposed to drive, and I know how to figure out what continent I'm on by the way the signs are posted, by the way the other people are driving, and by which side the steering wheel is on. I use clues to tell me. Okay? So when I say notice life rather than just living it, that's hard work. That is not a minor thing to do. And it can be life-changing. This is why people go away to workshops and come back changed people. Somebody got them to slow down and smell the roses. Number 6 is holiday extension. Wake up 1 hour earlier than you normally do. Number 7 is kitchen and shopping holiday. Don't cook. Number 8 is meditate every day for a minimum of 20 minutes. No rules, no procedures, no restrictions. Explore what meditation is for you. Take a walk, focus upon something you love, watch the clouds, listen to a ticking clock. My perspective is it doesn't matter what you do. Meditation is about going inside and listening. Number 9 is spiritual yoga. Stretch yourself emotionally and spiritually by doing something that you have been avoiding, don't want to do, and is not essential. Number 10 is practice random acts of kindness, best done without anyone having any knowledge of the source. Imagine going through the day looking for an opportunity to do invisible and random acts of kindness. And what the guide says is this isn't about the acts. The acts don't matter. Your attitude matters. Your intention matters. Your intention matters even if you reach out to do something and get thwarted. It doesn't matter that you don't complete the task. It matters from a spiritual perspective that you tried, because in the spirit world, because they have more dimensions than we do, in the spirit world, a positive intention extended is already done. Not only that, the guide says it has a concrete form. That in a spirit dimension, your positive intention creates a spiritual matter. It's real. And the spirit world can see it. It has color, form, shape. That's how powerful.
I've noticed the need to get credit for doing something, sort of like an end zone celebration.
Mm-hmm. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It depends on what your habits are. So this is just a list of maybe things. But going through the day trying to change one attitude can be like taking a holiday from who you have been. And it is devastatingly effective in showing you that you don't have to. So teasing about your first reaction, turning off the news, amazingly enough, watching the television does not help. You know, it's not about helping. It's about us. So if you take a day off and you refresh yourself, perhaps when you come back again, you'll have a refreshed mind and you'll be able to see things from a different perspective. And the last one, number 11, is daily review. Take some time every day to consider the emotional situations and decisions you made, to consider where you would have done things differently had you applied your higher self with more energy or enthusiasm. Again, that is not meant to create judgment. The intention is to encourage looking at what was and seeing that there were other choices. And once you allow those other choices as possibility, it's like letting light into a dark room. The next time a situation like that comes up, you might consider acting differently. It's in your consciousness that there's an alternative. So anyway, that's one of the many chessboard games that I create. My bizarre sense of humor.
It's interesting to be aware in a moment, reading over this list and imagining doing them, the resistance that shows itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In theory, it's so simple. And somebody asked before about the rules. I love spiritual law, and I love that one-page digest. I think it's fabulous, not because it's everything, because it was never meant to be everything. But there are 9 of them. I wonder if perhaps they thought, don't do a 10th because it'll look too religious. But there are 9 of them. And
is that on your website? Is that what you said? That
yes.
One is on,
the title of the piece is PC10, and it's available from, it's not on the internet yet through the main Pathwork website.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to do a 30-second commercial for them because they are just about ready to release a new CD that has the Path to the Real Self on it, which I use a lot in my teaching, that has a lot of these PC lectures, that has the question and answer lectures, that if you read through the numbers that are on the website, you'll notice that there are numbers that aren't there. And unbeknownst to you, we have A, B, C, and D versions of those lectures because there were question and answer periods that went on for weeks afterwards.
Oh.
But they were about the same topic, so they were called Q&As.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 250, and then there's 250A, and then there's 250B. Okay? And when they first put the lectures on the web, it was only so much time and money. Spirituality doesn't pay. So they left off the more unknown material. And they're now ready to put that out, and it's going to come out on a CD. And I'm thrilled. I will buy my own copy. They're $59.95. I think it's a deal. I want to support Pathwork. And so it would have a lot of references that I work with are not lecture references, and I do that not to show off, I hope, but because you can get the lectures off the internet. So I'm trying to bring something to the table in addition to that. So I tend to have a lot of these materials that I bring so that you'll know they exist and you'll get copies of them, or at least, 2-page versions of them.
Yeah.
But they're going to be putting out the whole version. So that's the International Pathwork Foundation commercial. From Pathwork Press, excuse me. So the document that I'm talking about is called PC10, and I do offer it on my website. And it is a 1-page digest that was created by the first helpership class that Ava created. And the reason I love it is it's fairly simple and straightforward. And what I advise people to do is take that list of spiritual principles and go down it, like Harry was teasing about this list. Now, that's look good. 8 irritates me. I don't want to do 8. Well, then maybe 8 is what you need to do. Same thing with spiritual principles. Read down the list and wait until you say, what?
Yeah,
that
it's always
doesn't
those. Yeah.
And
always those you don't want to do that you need to do.
Right. That might tell you the one you're breaking.
Yeah.
Okay? The other thing about the spiritual principles is that in a very wonderful circular yin-yang kind of way, if you break one, you break them all. And when I teach these, I have people, try to do devil's advocate and say, no, I can hate myself. I'm very kind to other people. I only hate myself. Well, that violates the law of brotherhood, and that's all there is to it. Why? Because you're one of us.
Yeah.
You don't get to self-select out the individual who's bad and wrong and put all your blame onto them and say, but that's okay because I don't blame anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. Okay? Now, if you blame if you break the law of brotherhood, the list is endless of all the other laws you break.
Yeah.
That's pretty foundational right there. So it's interesting to see in the phrasings what is a particular challenge for you. And it's interesting to see in how the law of brotherhood, for instance, is tied in directly to the law of cause and effect. So let me play with this for one more second. So I only hate me, not you, and I have the right to hate somebody, so leave me alone. I'm not breaking any rules. So yes, you're breaking the law of brotherhood, but you're also breaking the law of cause and effect. And this is where you need this behind-the-scrim material. You really can't operate in a spiritual realm without that extra dimension. Because when you hate someone, you are creating hate energy. And even if you can't see it, it's being spit out into the room. And because it is in your home, in your business, among your friends, it will affect them. And ultimately, they will affect you. So the law of cause and effect, if you put out hatred against one person, including yourself, that negativity is going to come back at you. A double dose if it's you. But can you see how if you utilize these principles rather than human laws of justice, if somebody gets off, if somebody breaks the law and gets off, we become furious.
But he didn't get. You never get off. But instead of serving a 3-month jail sentence or a 30-year jail sentence, you've just dumped this negative karma into a big basket that you don't even know exists. And it will remain active and relevant for all of eternity because it's karmic. You'd be a lot better off serving the 30 years. And that is perhaps what some people are doing during an individual lifetime. Since we don't know where they've come from, we don't know what they've done, we don't know what they've gotten away with. Individuals could be doing the equivalent of finally paying their debt to themselves, to their community, to all of us. And what that could look like is a pretty awful life where they may have volunteered for tasks that are, it's the equivalent of kitchen police duty, KP duty in the Army. What if a spirit said, my karmic credit card is maxed out, I have to do something, give me the whole thing in one lifetime, and the other spirit say, no, we'll just do 10% at a time. And the spirit says, no, I've had it. You tell me what to do, and I promise you, I'll do it. I tell you right now, I have the resolve. I will carry it out. But I want to do whatever it takes. If that means taking on other people's stuff, great. If it means never getting what I want, great. You tell me what to do, and I'm going to do it. And then I will be free, truly free. And I know enough now where I will never get myself back into karmic debt to that degree, ever again. That is a spirit in a penultimate state of development. That's a hero. And I could regale you with stories of what that might look like on a human level. And all they ask is that he complete the task. So the one thing you can't do is quit, no matter how bad it gets. If you quit, then you're not done, and you'll have to do it again. I would bet that all of us know of some people that we think are getting away with something. And part of what I do as a spiritual practice is I deliberately imagine the opposite. I imagine a scenario where, whether or not I see it, if they are racking up negative karmic debt, that they're going to have to pay it off. And I don't want to be that person. I have my own version of never again. And that's what we come here for. We come here, and I know that a lot of people that I counsel have spent, I'm just choosing figures out of thin air. Let's say they've spent 20 years in a bad relationship. And then they wake up one day and say, what was I thinking? And never again. That's a spiritual lesson. Good. Nobody intended you to be in a bad relationship. However, the reason you got there was you built certain characterology, and you have a certain personality, and you have a predisposition for, and so we're going to have to deal with all that stuff. But we were all hanging out with you, waiting for the day when you would say, I'm done. And from that day forward, the spirits are allowed to help you. So at one point in the lectures, it says, in these two lectures, at one point it says that spirit is not allowed to interfere. They're allowed to support, but they're not supposed to support you to let you off the hook. Their support may look on a human level like they are holding your head underwater, not because they enjoy it, but because you need to get something in the cells of your being. You need to get something from an emotional, psychic, physical experience, sometimes life-threatening, that will
you would have to go on.
A resolve into you that you will never release again. I tend to be a bit serious sometimes. That's why I joke a lot, so I can come out of this serious stuff. But I don't see all this stuff as negative. I see all this as positive. Yeah. And I like the idea that who would bring this up to hurt us? I mean, if you use your logic, God can't possibly mean to sit up there and chuckle. I mean, how much fun could that be? So there are some pieces of literature. One is C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, and the other is a relatively unknown piece by Mark Twain called Letters from the Earth. And both those, they're both small, short novels. Both those novels purport that there's a spirit down here on Earth who's reporting back to God saying, you're not going to believe this. And talking about how humans are so enmeshed in their own stuff they can't see straight. They can't see other alternatives. But the tone of both novels is depressing. The tone of both novels is stupid people. And that's not the tone in the Pathwork lectures. Tone in the Pathwork lectures was, we would do anything for you, but we're not allowed to interfere. You get your eyes the teensiest bit open, like pups after 7 days. You get a clue, you get a glimmer, you will get all the help we are allowed to give you. We're waiting for you. And the only reason we would not answer is it is not in your highest good that you know we can hear you. So among the lectures that I listed, the 18 to 22 is a lecture on Jesus Christ. And what it describes, and this is a touchy point for me because I'm a Jew, so it made my Pathwork experience kind of bouncy. And I was told by my Pathwork teachers that I did not have to believe anything, but I needed to be willing to discuss it. That's all they asked. So in the Pathwork lecture about Christ, it talks about what made Christ unusual as a human being was all support was withdrawn from him at one point. And the lecture says, I'm paraphrasing, we don't do that to anyone. I wonder if you can kind of get this. It has, you don't have to believe in Christ to get that if there was a spirit here walking among us who was cut off from spirit in a way that no other human being has ever been cut off from spirit, the blackness of that moment, we can't imagine it because we've never been cut off. And in my last teleconference, I talked about soul movements and dreams, and I really don't want to digress too much, but we have all the help we could ever hope for. It's right there. All we have to do is ask. All we have to do is look. All we have to do is listen. And messages will come to us. The idea that a spirit would be forced to be left completely and utterly alone as a test is mind-boggling. Well, it's in both of them, but I don't read the edited ones. I'm a snob. But I like to honor what I don't know. So it's actually a little past 7. So time to close this. Thank you all for attending. If you have any questions, you're welcome to email me at any point. I'm happy to do that. And I'll put the notes with the little stories and fables and so forth out for you once I have the recordings ready and I'm ready to announce that you can listen to the recordings or you can download them. So thank you again. Very much appreciate it. Oh, yeah. Okay. It's all of you. All right. Good night.
Love, be still and know that I am God, that I am with you. Be still and feel that I am real in every light, in every shadow. Be still and know. I never left your side, not since